Come see the Portland Art Museum's new exhibit where they're showcasing the vibrant, surreal, and playful energy of rock concert posters and fashion from 1960s San Francisco. Aptly named Psychedelic Rock Posters and Fashion of the 1960s, this collection of nearly 200 posters and eclectic vintage fashion is on display through the end of March next year. But you can also check the Portland Art Museum calendar for lectures, movies, and more related to the Psychedelic Posters exhibit at portlandartmuseum.org. Hey Portland, are you ready to vote? The League of Women Voters has reliable, nonpartisan information about what's on your ballot. You can watch candidate interviews, listen to podcasts, read balanced explanations of ballot measures, and even learn more about ranked choice voting, which seems like a thing we all need to do. Go to lwvpdx.org or to vote411.org, and there you can view just the candidates and measures on your ballot. Vote with confidence with lwvpdx.org. Today on CityCast Portland, we're continuing to sort through the many candidates running for our 12 new city council seats. You might remember we took a look at the developing district races this summer by picking candidates who reached the threshold to receive matching funds from the city. This time around, we're honing in on candidates with the most individual contributions in each district. We'll be looking at what they're campaigning on, who's supporting them, and how they're trying to stand out. And our very own executive producer, John Notarianni, is here to walk us through District 2, which covers all of North and Inner Northeast Portland. It's Tuesday, October 22nd. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Claudia.
I actually really love that it's you who is breaking down District 2 for me, the district we both live in.
Yeah, we were talking about it in a meeting about a month ago, and we're like, wait, we both have a lot of vested interest in what happens in this district, so let's just break it down ourselves.
So here we go. For those of you who don't live here, District 2 covers all of North Portland and most of Northeast. It's also the second most diverse of the 4 districts, with a 35% non-white population. But before we get into individual candidates, in broad strokes, how is the race shaping up, in your opinion, John? Like, what's changed since the last time we spoke about it on the show in July?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change is last time we talked about it, there were 5 candidates that had qualified for matching funds. There are now 22 candidates on the ballot, right? So it's just gotten a lot bigger. There's a lot more people in this race. And it's really competitive. You know, this is an interesting district because it covers such a wide swath of Portland. You know, it goes all the way from like St. John's, where we live, and like our neighborhoods like Piedmont that traditionally are less affluent, less white. But then it also covers some really, really wealthy areas. 97212, the zip code, that is the wealthiest place in the region. Talking about neighborhoods like Irvington and Alameda and Grant Park. Both of these are in the same district. So, like, there's this really wide array of people who live in this district, and because of that, there's a really wide array of candidates, right? You know, there's people who are big institutional players who've been in government for forever. There's people who are small business owners who have no government experience, and it's not really clear that one group has an edge over the others.
Yeah. Well, are there any certain concerns that seem to be rising to the top for District 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issues are the same things that we've been talking about in every one of these district conversations. Stuff like housing and homelessness is a big issue here. You know, of course, like some parts of North Portland in particular do have like a pretty big unhoused population. There's a Safe Rest Village going on that is going in our neighborhood in St. John's. So there's a lot of people that are really concerned about that. Also, public safety is a really big issue, as it is in a lot of the city. But I think that it also sort of has this bent of like how petty crime is affecting small businesses as well as residents. Because, you know, we've seen in North Portland in particular, there has been a pretty noticeable spike in like small petty crimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've decided to take a look at 6 of the top candidates from each district as ranked by the number of individual contributions they've received, because our thinking is that looking at the total number of voters who've donated to them will give us a broader picture of the community support than just looking at the total dollar amount they've raised. So very briefly, who are these top 6 candidates? Let's start off with the candidate with the most individual contributions, Nat West.
As of October 18th, he's brought in 1,437 individual contributions, which is like by far the most in this district. Reverend Nat of Reverend Nat's Hard Cider, you might remember. Big, sort of Portland brand. He's running for political office for his very first time, but he's thinking that sort of his background as a small business owner is really going to sort of help him with a pragmatic view of how to get things done. Through his business, he did support a lot of grassroots and sort of like progressive organizations over the years. Also, after closing down the cider business, which happened a few years ago, he was a bus driver at TriMet, which is sort of like an interesting wrinkle in his biography. So yeah, I mean, like a real outsider candidate is leading the way, at least by this metric.
Right. Well, the next one up is Dan Ryan, no stranger to our community.
Yeah, Dan Ryan, first time running for political office. No, of course not. He's a sitting city council member, the only current commissioner who is running in this race, which is unusual. He's got just over 1,000 individual contributions at this point, though, 1,033. He's been on council, so we've seen him. A lot of people know his name. He really focused a lot of his work on homelessness issues. He was the guy that really sort of pushed for the Safe Rest Village program that is currently in place. That's sort of one of the main, if not the main, alternative housing initiative in the city right now. But yeah, I think that he's sort of trying to position himself as like the adult in the room, the guy who's done this job before. And he's, at this point, the only one who can say that.
Right. Well, next up is Marnie Glickman. I know there was a bit of controversy, people saying like, she doesn't even go here. But it's clear that she does live in the North District. So can you tell us a little bit more about Marnie?
Yeah. Her last big public-facing project was in California, in a school district down there. But she's been around Oregon over the year. She's worked for several elected officials, like Oregon Congresswomen Darlene Huey and Elizabeth Furse. Also, interestingly, worked for Ralph Nader once upon a time. But yeah, she's been really outspoken about sort of climate and transportation issues. Has also said that she's interested in more funding to operate Portland Street Response 24/7, and has gotten the attention of at least some institutional players in a pretty big way. And also, individual contributors. She's the third person in this district that has topped 1,000 individual contributions from Portlanders. So she's making her presence known.
Nice. And the next, Mariah Hudson. I feel like she just came up for me out of nowhere. I wasn't seeing much of her in July.
Yeah. She's sort of I guess you could say that she's kind of like a rising political voice, has worked at OHSU as a senior communications specialist, also worked on the PBOT Budget and Bureau Advisory Committee. She went through Emerge, which is like a political training program for Democratic women recently, and has, been getting some attention for sure. She's gotten some endorsements from business, gotten some endorsements from labor groups. Interestingly, Claudia, of the 6 candidates that we're discussing in this episode, the only one who's been endorsed by Renee Gonzalez, current city commissioner and mayoral candidate as well. Mm-hmm. She's also said that she's like really interested in regulations on short-term rentals. So, compared to some of the more progressive, idealistic candidates in this race, is sort of trying to carve a lane, I think, that is like a little bit more pragmatic.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we return, the last 2 candidates on our list with the highest number of individual contributions. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. Stream beautiful, hand-picked films anytime, anywhere. And be sure to catch the cult classic The Fall, now streaming exclusively on Mubi in a spectacular new 4K restoration. Filmed across 24 countries over a period of 4 years, Tarsem Singh's ostentatious epic sees a bedridden stuntman played by a magnetic Lee Pace spin an escapist fantasy for a hospitalized young girl. The story transports her into the exotic landscapes of her imagination, backdropped by magnificent costumes and stunning locations. So don't miss your chance to experience this film like never before. You could start streaming The Fall and more for 30 days free at mubi.com/citycast. That's mubi.com/citycast. Did you know you can find the best deals at the Habitat for Humanity Portland Region Restores? You can shop for new and gently used furniture, appliances, lighting, building materials, decor, home goods, and more, all at discounted prices of 25 to 75% off. Let me say that again. That's 25 to 75% off your favorite home and furniture brands. And bonus, every purchase helps fund local Habitat home building and home repair programs. Plus, you're shopping sustainably at the Restore by giving pre-loved items new life and keeping usable items out of our local landfills. Shop online or in-store at the Restore locations in Beaverton, Gresham, and Portland. The Restores are open 7 days a week. Visit pdxrestore.org to find a Restore near you, and there you can shop, save, and give back today. Well, the next up with 717 contributions is Samir Kanal. I feel like you and I have both met him on separate occasions.
Yeah,
because he's out there.
He's out there. I met him, he's running in District 2, but I met him at the Sunday Parkways event in Southwest Portland. So even though it's not his district, he was out there cruising around, shaking hands, saying hey to people. Samir is an interesting guy. So he's worked at the city in the public safety service area. He's done a lot of work with police oversight, also support for Portland Street Response, and he worked as a project manager for the Police Accountability Commission. So this is a group that is tasked with basically taking volunteers and having them make recommendations for how to improve the police department. Samir did a lot of coordinating there, of sort of overseeing this project. So in an election where public safety is obviously going to be a big issue, he's got, some credentials there, but in a different way, where he's sort of worked adjacent to a lot of these things and in these sort of consensus building roles, which is one of the things that he says is a big focus of his campaign as well.
Right. And Tiffany Penson is our sixth. She has 688 contributions as of today, which is Friday, the 18th. Mm-hmm. Tell me about her. That's another candidate that I'll be honest, just jumped up for me this time around.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not a name that's widely known, but she's been around. She's been working in city government in various capacities for 18 years. Her most recent role is as a people and culture manager with the city of Portland, which essentially is HR, but much more focused on sort of individual people's experience, making sure the culture of the city is working for the people who work there as much as it is trying to fit these people into some, managerial hierarchy. Has also worked at a nonprofit that aims to address racism in education, has done a lot of work, with minority representation in small business, and says that that's something that she really cares about. She's been critical of the city for the ways that it has, provided or not provided services to a lot of people. And I think that she's talked a lot about minority and women and veteran-owned small businesses and sort of trying to find ways to make the city an easier place for those people to do business and succeed.
Nice. The one candidate I was surprised that didn't make the top 6 for individual contributions is Michelle DePass, because she has been such a community leader in North Portland for so long. Did she at all come close?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we chose to talk about 6 candidates here, but that cutoff doesn't mean that these are the only qualified candidates. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more people that are right in this race. And we're going to be talking about a few of them as we get to endorsements. Michelle DePass definitely is one of those people that is very much in this race, along with several other names.
Cool. Well, how would you sort these candidates between who's pushing more progressive policies and who's taking on a more moderate path? I feel like North Portland might be mirroring Southeast a little bit Like it's like the difference between progressive and more progressive. But
Yeah. It's like, how far to the left are you leaning? None of these are conservative candidates by traditional measures, even compared to some of the like really tough on crime, law and order candidates that we've seen in other races in this election. None of these candidates are really banging that drum either. And like when you break down who's more moderate, you would look at people like Dan Ryan, Mariah Hudson, Tiffany Penson. But like, again, Dan Ryan's been like a big advocate for like homeless support services. And like Tiffany Penson is all about small businesses. But I think that stands in contrast to people like Nat West, Samir Kanal, Marnie Glickman, that are really interested in these sort of traditional progressive Portland policies. But at the same time, public safety is a big issue in this election. And I was looking at the coin debate that they had for District 2. The moderator had one question at the start that was like, if there's one word of like what the biggest issue is in your district, every single one of them said public safety, aside from Nat West, who said safe streets, which is basically public safety,
Same thing. He was just trying to get around the public safety law and order look.
I mean, he also went last. He was towards the end. He wanted to like change it up a little bit.
He's like, safety public.
But yeah, I mean, which also means that like, these candidates are aware of the realities of like what this district needs as well.
Well, let's look at endorsements since you teased them just now. So,
coming attractions, endorsements, yeah.
How are the major institutional players lining up around these candidates? I want to start off with Street Trust. Like, who is Street Trust going behind? Because I know they dropped Carmen Rubio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're very picky.
Yeah. The Street Trust, sort of progressive transit safe streets organization. They're going after the three most progressive candidates, I think. Samir Kanal, Marnie Glickman, Nat West. People who really are interested in the sort of big picture of how to change Portland in the future. Right.
Well, what about Carmen Rubio? We were just talking about her. I'm curious what the top mayoral candidates, who they're endorsing. I know you said Gonzalez is only endorsing Mariah Hudson. Who is Rubio talking about?
Yeah. It seems weird to talk about like who two city commissioners are endorsing, but I'd say up until the last 2 weeks, it has sort of felt like we were sorting into this sort of like polar race where there's these two lanes that you could be in, Rubio being the more progressive one, Gonzalez being the more law and order one. Rubio has endorsed Dan Ryan, Tiffany Penson, Marnie Glickman, and Samir Kanal, which is interesting. That means that Nat West, of these six, is the one candidate that has not gotten an endorsement from either of them.
That's interesting. Well, you want to guide me through the rest?
I think it's interesting to look at the sort of fire department and police endorsements as well, because those usually track to sort of more pragmatic, less ideological endorsements. The police union, the only person of these six they've endorsed was Tiffany Penson. Small business advocate, a minority-owned business advocate. But Fire has endorsed Dan Ryan, also Penson, and Nat West. Which I thought was interesting too.
Yeah.
But it gets really wacky when you look at the sort of major, what I would say is the biggest media endorsements that have come out, because they're all over the place and they introduce a lot more names into this conversation, right?
Right.
Only the Oregonian has completely endorsed people we've talked about. They endorsed Dan Ryan, Tiffany Penson, Nat West. But then you go to the Willamette Week, they endorsed Dan Ryan, Michelle DePass, who you mentioned earlier, Claudia, and Elena Pertle-Guiney, who is a policy strategist who's been around for many years, worked for Governor Kate Brown, worked for John Kitzhaber, another one of those names that's sort of been in the background but might not be known to a lot of people. Then when you get to the Portland Mercury, they change it up again. Samir Kanal from our list, Michelle DePass, and then they bring in an endorsement of Jonathan Ticini, also another interesting candidate.
Right.
He's an author. He's been a union leader for a really long time. His, I think, most interesting claim to fame that might not have much to do about this race, but I just think is fascinating. He once challenged Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination in a New York Senate election in 2006.
Yeah, and he talks about it really glibly. Like, he's just like, I went against the, blah, 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 Secretary of State. I don't know, whoever that is. I don't know. She's like,
Okay.
Hillary Clinton.
Has no bearing on this election, but I just think is an interesting factoid that I like to keep bringing out. So yeah, I mean, we have these 6 candidates that we've discussed. With these endorsements, we bring another 3 candidates in. And honestly, I think that there are even more people who we haven't gotten to yet that could be really viable candidates and that have a lot of community support as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, endorsements aside, is anything jumping out in surprising ways? Who has anyone made headlines?
I mean, I think the thing that's surprising, this might sound like a cop-out, but it's not. It's just surprising how crowded this field is and how difficult it is for anyone to make headlines, right? Like I just said, we've gone through 9 candidates so far. There's even more qualified candidates in this race. I do think it's been interesting seeing some of the people who've been stirring up conversation late in the race. People like Samir Kanal, people like Elena Pertolgini. But in terms of upsets, in terms of candidates striking out in their own in a really wild way, or steering the conversation about District 2 really strongly, not really seeing that. I think, for anyone who's trying to sort of sort through this, it really does come down to looking at these individual people, really digging into their backgrounds a bit and figuring out what is important to you and who the people are that are going to be supporting those issues.
Yeah, just to succinctly wrap what John just said, what's surprising is that they're all qualified.
Yeah. And I think that was a big concern going into this election, that if we're trying to find 3 candidates from each district, are we going to have 1 or 2 really stellar ones and then a bunch of sort of mwop mediocre candidates? But I think what we're seeing this election has really drawn a lot of expertise from different parts of the region and maybe people who hadn't really thought of a big public facing political run before. And they're in the race.
Well, John, thank you so much for helping break down District 2. Are we going to share notes on who we're voting for afterwards? Are we going to let's do our bracket.
Let's be real. We've already shared those notes behind the scenes. Maybe not on the podcast, but if you find us at Slim's, maybe we'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.